Okay, so let's shift over to here now, change gears slightly. We looked last time at a very brief oversimplification of the like tendencies drifting towards the left or the right. What we're going to look at now are some people who are very influential in the development of political and economic thinking on both the left and the right. Two in particular are big influences on the United States and the choices that we made to lead to the government that we and system that we have. And two of them are a bit more wacky. So give me a second here. All right, so the first guy we're going to look at here is an English philosopher named Thomas Hobbes. And I think you'll see some very influential things that Hobbes believed that made their way into American political thought. Hobbes' basic premise was that government existed to protect people, and that governments were created by people in order to protect themselves from others. And this others is a pretty big, like, category of anybody not like us, basically. And there's certain preconditions to understand. Number one, there are unalienable rights that come from a creator. Now, this should sound very familiar because it's like almost verbatim for what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the creed of the Declaration of Independence. Hobbes also believed that the state of nature was one of violence. Nature itself was all about violence and conflict. And in order to sort of overcome this tendency, government was put in place, and government became a civilizing force. Now, in order to achieve anything, the government needed to have absolute power to guarantee protection. So the weird thing is that in Hobbes's logic, governments had to have absolute power, but they existed by the consent of the people. So the government existed because people willingly gave up some of their freedom and rights to a nearly absolutely powerful government in order to secure protection. In Hobbes's view, the best possible scenario or situation is one where there was an individual king or ruler, and where government was tied directly into the religious beliefs of a country. So there are elements here of what Hobbes says that can be found in both left and right thinking. And there are elements also where you can see that both the left and the right would have problems with Hobbes. And a lot of the foundation and basis of America's political decisions in our documents come from the writings of Hobbes. Now, there's also this thick fellow here. This is Scottish philosopher, and philosophers, the same thing, Hobbes was a philosopher too, Adam Smith. Unlike Hobbes, Adam Smith is more concerned with economics, but there is a political element to his work as well. Adam Smith is the sort of father of the modern idea of free market capitalism, the idea that people's choices make the best environment economically for success and for thriving. In 1776, the same year as our revolution, Smith published a book known as The Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, and it's just usually referred to as Wealth of Nations. And in it, he argues for something that becomes known by others as laissez-faire economics. This is literally where we get the word lazy from in English. It's a French term. Laissez-faire economics is the idea that the less a government interferes with the economy, the better off it is. That and laissez-faire literally means hands off or free or no hands. That throughout history, economies where the government has not directly involved itself have tended to produce better outcomes for everybody involved. And if a government was willing and able to stay out of the economy as much as possible and economic activities, that this would benefit the vast majority of people the best way possible. Ironically enough, obviously all the founding fathers read Adam Smith, and Alexander Hamilton was a huge devotee of Adam Smith. The British read Smith too, but they really didn't think much of his ideas until after the revolution was over, and then they kind of took him seriously, and lo and behold, they built the world's biggest and most successful empire that ran for the better part of a century. Maybe it would have been better to try that first. We might still be a British colony if that was the case, but I digress. So these two guys, Hobbes and Smith, is where a lot of America's ideas in our founding come from. And there are elements of left and right thought in what they propose. But they really aren't like directly tied into why it is that we have left and right politically. Let's look at the reasons why we have the extreme left and the extreme right. This charming fellow is Karl Marx, the unfunny Marx. Karl Marx is the man credited with the modern political theory known as communism. Marx was a journalist, and he wrote newspaper articles on the situation of the relationship between work and owners and how people were doing. And Marx was hired by a group of people in the 1830s, early 1840s, paid to write out political philosophy. And the political philosophy that he sort of concocted or was told to write about becomes known as communism. This idea that the government owns everything and is in charge of everything, and that we as humans own nothing and we're okay with that. So, for Karl Marx, life is all about struggle. And in the Marxist view, the struggle is between two groups, and Marx even gives them a really cool name. The bourgeois are the wealthy owners and the holders of money. So if you hear the phrase like bougie or bougie, this is what it means, bourgeois. They are the wealthy people who disdain everybody, and they really have all the power and the money. They maybe at most make up 10% of the population. Then there's the proletariat. Those are the workers. And, the proletariat makes up approximately 90% or so, maybe even higher, of the workforce and humanity in general. Now, eventually, the proletariat will figure out that they outnumber the bourgeois who are trying to hold them down. And out of fear of violence, the bourgeois give in and they establish democracy, which works for the proletariat because the proletariat have more people. Eventually, the proletariat will throw out all the trappings of the bougie and the old way, and they will stage a revolution. Now, this revolution will result in government control of the economy. And everything that this country, whatever it is, will make, physically, mentally, and otherwise, become property of the government. Government controls everything. So who's the government? Well, this is an important point to kind of understand. Karl Marx really was a big believer in science. And let me be very clear about something here. I am not disparaging science in any way, shape, or form. I am simply going to point out some logical things that we need to think about contextually. Realize that 1500 years ago, people in science believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, or at least the galaxy, and everything rotated around the Earth. We know now that's not true, but for a long time, that's what people believed. Um, in the 1800s, the real science was the science of Charles Darwin. Darwin wrote a book called On the Evolution of the Species. And in his book, Darwin maintained that human beings were the natural chain of progression that resulted from nature and adaptation. And that human beings could trace themselves back to monkeys because at its heart, we are all monkeys. Now, this is where the theory gets a little creepy and needs to be not again. So, according to Darwin, the science proved that by looking at a person, you could tell what type of monkey they were evolved from. And some monkeys were smarter and better than others. And how would you be able to tell this? Well, it's pretty simple. You could, I don't know, look at something like skin color. And Darwin argued that certain skin tones, like white, meant that people came from a better kind of monkey. And so that's kind of what his idea was hinged on. So if you're not following this, it's really that some people are descended from better kinds of monkeys than others. And the people who came from the right kinds of monkeys, as in fair skinned Europeans, were the ones who should be in charge of everything because they came from a better group of monkeys than other people did. Under communism, the government distributed all the wealth. The government owned everything, and the government simply gave you what you needed, and you were very happy with having it. The problem is, in reality, this has never worked, and it's not ever really going to work. Ultimately, in Marx's view, nobody owns anything. There's no private property, no private ownership. You get everything from the government, which really kind of makes the question of why would you bother to work? Well, then the government forces you to do it. So the left's idea of groupthink and elitism really owe themselves to Karl Marx, as well as his idea of critical theory. Now, on the right, it's another German guy. This is Friedrich Nietzsche. They both lived around the same time as each other. I don't believe that they ever met, but I could be mistaken. Now, where Marx emphasized this idea of government ownership of everything and sort of this big hippie kumbaya where everybody shares stuff and there's these certain people that are from better monkeys than others. Nietzsche takes a very different approach. Nietzsche's belief was that people were limited because of media and popular culture. That media made people soft and weak and mediocre. That people, all they wanted to do was get along because that's what the media sold them this idea of. It gave them ignorance. They didn't understand things because they lacked the education, the wherewithal, and the know-how and the willingness to learn. So therefore, they're just. And then there's the issue of religion, which creates weakness because religion makes people think that there's something higher than them that they have to depend on. According to Nietzsche, eventually, there will rise up something he calls the Ubermensch, the Superman. And this Superman will realize that he is capable of so much more than what he is being told through the media. He will reject the media's lies about mediocrity, about homogeneity and being the same as everybody else, the ignorance that media and culture breed, and the idea that you should get in your car and close it up and just let it sit there for a while, so to speak, and do nothing is ridiculous. You need to be involved. And how do you do that? You fight. You make yourself better. You rise above mediocrity and strive for excellence. You refuse to go along with everybody and conform. You educate yourself and exercise your intellect. You abandon false religion and worship only the self because yourself is what counts. The people that do this, and to be fair to Nietzsche here, he's not being sexist, it's men and women. The people who do this will be the ones who will control everything. And who are these people? Very simple. Science tells us they're mostly blonde hair, blue eyed, fair skinned people. They will rise above the culture, and Superman and Superwoman will marry. Well, they don't even have to marry because marriage is an artificial construct, but they will come together and create super children to breed a superior race of people. Now, in case you are not following this, Friedrich Nietzsche is basically like the poster child of Nazi Germany. Nietzsche's ideas form a lot of Nazi ideology. But notice he's not that far off from Karl Marx with a lot of what he's saying, except that for Nietzsche, it's all about the person as opposed to like a group. So, why do I bring up these two random German guys? Because unfortunately, their ideas drift into America in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s and irrevocably change how Americans do things and how we view ourselves. So we'll pick this up tomorrow. Peace and love.